Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Spring 2024 Investor Conference. My name is Adam Lowensteiner, Vice President of Lytham Partners. Before we begin, for those not familiar, Lytham Partners is one of the country's leading investor relations firms. With more than 2 decades of corporate access experience, we have built one of the industry's most diverse and effective platforms for connecting small-cap companies with high-quality and focused institutional investors while creating a framework of best practices in all aspects of investor relations. Today's discussion is hopefully yet another example where we can bring value to multiple constituents. Our next presentation comes from Spire Global, ticker symbol of SPIR, that is Sam Peter Indiana Romeo on the New York Stock Exchange. Presenting from the company today is its Chief Executive Officer, President, and Director, Peter Platzer. Today, Peter and I will engage in a fireside chat-like Q&A session. We will dive into the discussion in a moment, but for one final item, I want to remind everyone that Spire Global is available for one-on-one meetings. If you have not already signed up, please send me an email at lowensteiner@lythampartners.com or visit lythampartners.com/select2024. From there, you can click on the investor registration button and make your one-on-one selections. With that said, now let me turn the discussion over with Peter Platzer, President and CEO of Spire Global. Hi, Peter. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Adam, for having me.
Thank you for doing this. We appreciate it. Let's expand a bit on a few topics. To start the conversation, can you tell us something about yourself, your background? How did you find Spire?
So I am originally from Austria, a high energy and fusion physicist who was fortunate enough to spend a little bit of time at CERN and Max Planck, and always had this big vision of like, how could we leverage space to improve life on Earth and understand life better for all of us? But it was a very, very slow and crunchy industry back then. So as someone who always liked business and had like some software businesses on the side back then, I ended up working for the Boston Consulting Group, first in Europe and then in Asia. And then they sent me to Harvard Business School, where again, I looked at space, which was still very, very slow. I actually wrote a mission statement for my life coming through a process that was happening there, which came out to lead, inspire, and create the business of space for the benefit of all mankind. But the timing was not right there and then. So I ended up working on Wall Street as a quantitative investment manager for just under 10 years. And through an event at NASA Ames in the late 2000s, had conversations with people like, Ray Kurzweil, Peter Diamandis, Salim Ismail, and others, where they talked about industries that are powered by exponential technologies, and because of that, go on to exponential growth trajectories, and other industries which do not have that. And particularly, Peter D made a very compelling case that space is one of those industries powered by some underlying exponential technology. I did a bit more research. I left Wall Street and got my last graduate degree in France in space science and management, where indeed the little mini theses that you have to write are uncovered and described that exponential law, 10x performance every 5 years, that has been powering the space industry by now for over a quarter of a century, and we do not see any kind of like change in that. Armed with that understanding of what is happening there, and knowing that the rest of the world has not yet caught on to this exponential change, together with a few friends and classmates, we started Spire in the typical grungy garage in San Francisco, where we built our first spacecraft and had it launched within 9 months, and then kept on going from there to what you see today, a global company with the world's largest multi-purpose constellation, covering every spot on Earth every 15 minutes, over 100 times a day.
So your technologies are very proprietary of nature. Can you describe a little bit about how they work, what makes them proprietary, and also maybe a little bit about the competitive landscape?
So when we started out, some of the elements that we said we're going to do, very, very smart people, for example, at NASA said, Peter, I think that's going to break the laws of physics. We're very, very glad to have some of those, skeptical people now as very, very happy and long-scale and large-scale customers. But it gives you a sense of the nature of technology that Spire had to develop. Because indeed, Adam, you're 100% correct. we are a full stack company. So there's space technology, both the sensors, the hardware, as well as the software running those sensors, the whole components that make up the spacecraft, the analytics that run on the data that we collect, the ground station network, all of that is proprietary technology from Spire. Our spacecraft are very, very small. They have about the same relationship as the PC, the personal computer, had to mainframe computers back in the day, because many people might still think a satellite is like this massive bus-sized, gold foil wrapped thing that has taken billions of dollars and a decade plus to build from some government agencies, when, as a matter of fact, it is a wine bottle size, so like maybe a case of wine bottle size device that is driven by some of the single most modern piece of electronics and software that is capturing data 24/7 as it circles the Earth at about 500 kilometers on orbit, meaning it goes all across the Earth once every 90 minutes. Now, the technology that Spire has built in particular is focused on radio waves, or radio technology. There's basically three types of spacecraft, and they're very distinct and different and non-competitive with each other, right? We call them looking, talking, and listening spacecraft. Looking spacecraft, they use reflections of the sunlight on the surface of Earth as it goes towards the heaven to capture information about the Earth. And there are companies in there like a Maxar and the Black Sky and the Planet and the Satellogic and then Airbus and some others. And then you have distinct and separate and non-competitive to those looking satellite companies. You have talking satellites and talking satellite companies. They basically transport data from one spot on Earth via space to another spot on Earth. And there are names in there like an SES or a Viasat or a Starlink, a Kuiper, a OneWeb, an AST, and a number of other companies. And that's kind of like their job. They move data from one spot on Earth to another. And then the third category, indeed, are listening companies. Again, very distinct technology business model, non-competitive from the two others. Are listening companies that use radio frequencies or radio waves to observe what is happening on or around planet Earth. The radio waves are really cool in the way that they don't require the sun, so they operate day and night, which is very, very neat, and they are relevant all across Earth. So not just where there's lots of people, for example, as the communication spacecraft are mostly relevant for, but anywhere, because there are phenomena describing what is happening on Earth, like the weather or the traffic of airplanes or of ships, that is truly covering all of Earth. And as a matter of fact, they are not inhibited by the weather, like, for example, the looking spacecraft, because if you have the right science and technology, and Spire happens to have some of that, you actually get to learn something about the weather, like how much rain there is, or what is the temperature, or how much wind there is, all of which is very, very powerful and valuable information. Now, all of that technology, the hardware, the software, the analytics that is built on those data sets is proprietary in-house to Spire.
So on your latest conference call, you referred to two massive generational trends that are supported by three further trends that has and will be supporting the company's growth rate going forward. Can you discuss these trends to the point that what already the company has accomplished, a very high growth rate, but also what investors could anticipate by getting involved now, meaning we are still very much in the early innings, and here's why.
I think we're still actually out in the concession stand, and the innings haven't even started yet, Adam, I would say. So from my days as an investor on Wall Street, we had like this saying that I'm sure you and your customers and friends are familiar with: the trend is your friend. You never want to, I used to be a sailor. You never want to sail against the wind. You always want to sail with the wind. That's a much, much easier thing. So when we understood the exponential technology, when we looked for what are use cases where data from space is the only way to solve them, right? There were like a few things that we started to identify. And in particular, there were lots of two generational trends, as we call them, and then three supportive trends. And they were climate change and global security as the generational trends, and the supportive trends being the digitalization of the global economy, the growth of space as a strategic, competitive environment, and AI and machine learning to extract some more value. So let me talk you through those trends in a little bit more detail and why we consider them generational and long-lasting and providing a massive, massive backdraft to the future sustained high-level growth of the company. And we're partially responsible probably for Spire being able to grow at over 100% compound annual growth rate since we had our first 1 million of revenue, reach 100 million in just 5 years of ARR. Climate change and the weather are impacting at least a third of the global economy. About 20, 25 years ago, there was a study done which identified that about a third of the global economy is impacted by weather. Now, that's about $30 trillion of GDP. But what is even more powerful is that at that point in time, they estimated that about 10% of that impact is what they called mitigatable impact, meaning that you could mitigate that impact if you had far more or perfectly accurate prediction about the weather. That's $3 trillion. Wow. Now, what has happened since that study was done is that people started to recognize that the ferocity, the frequency of weather events has only increased. So that impact is probably even greater today. So that means that there is an increasing, literally exponentially increasing force that is having exponentially increasing negative monetary consequences for countries, communities, and companies. Now, Spire is collecting data and generating analytics that helps those countries or those corporations or communities adapt to and mitigate those weather impacts. And you saw recently, just one example of how that heightened relevance is translating itself then into, increased awards when Spire announced that we had a multi-million-dollar contract with a financial services company in the weather prediction space. So that's the first one, climate change, weather, and how it impacts communities, companies, and corporations and countries. The second one is global security. Just like weather, where you have to observe information all across Earth 24/7, meaning it is only and exclusively possible to do so from space. Over 80% of weather prediction accuracy comes from space-based data collection. Global security is another area where space is becoming an ever more important realm. And due to the rise of global, challenges in this realm, space is becoming an ever more relevant medium to collect data and information. Now, in particular, the technologies that Spire is employing, radio waves, are quite helpful because they penetrate, the night, the night, so they don't require light. They penetrate foliage, so that you can do that. They penetrate weather, so they are really 24/7 every time, anywhere. A lot of human activity might be stealthy to the eye, but is actually quite noisy from a radio frequency perspective. There was a recent announcement that a customer of Spire using the Spire platform connected a Bluetooth device directly to space. That gives you a sense of that power of RF technology sensing what is happening where, in particularly as those elements concerned with global security called access denied or access challenged areas. We believe that, unfortunately, global security is going to continue to be something that is occupying the headlines and people's minds and people's budgets. And that is certainly something that we have seen. If you remove from like the daily news coverage, I would say local politics, you are left with a lot of coverage regarding the impact of weather and climate and or the impact of global security. Those are generational trends that have been driving our product. And so, for example, today, about 1 billion people already have better weather prediction because of data that Spire is collecting. But that is about 10% of the global population. And so we have a lot more to go there. And unfortunately, even those 1 billion people are not able to mitigate their share of the $3 trillion of economic losses. So we're really just absolutely scratching the surface with our $100 million plus revenue. Now let's take a second and talk about those supporting trends, because they further strengthen the long-term sustained demand for Spire products. And when we talk about long-term, as I mentioned, I'm European, right? So we think in like decades and generations, and that's kind of like how we think about building companies. The first one is the digitalization of the global economy. I think there is a growing widespread understanding that the oil of the 21st century, as people started to call it, is data, is digital information, and especially unique proprietary data that is very, very hard to get. Well, getting data from space is just about, one of the single hardest places to get to and capture data. And Spire is in a very, very unique position of being fully deployed. Our constellation is fully deployed in that realm. We're the only one that we know of that in our sector is fully deployed, capturing these types of data. So that, I think, is the first one. That's like the digitalization of the global economy, driving the importance of access to unique data, right? Then you have the increase of space in importance. Company formation, capital formation has been growing at very, very high double digits now for at least a decade or two, showcasing how more and more countries want to get to space for the obvious security benefits, but also for the obvious inspirational benefits, for the showcasing of technological advancement, technological prowess and capabilities, and the inspiration that space often delivers. And if you were someone who perusses the McKinsey journal, they came out and said to their group of CEOs, if you do not have a space strategy now for your corporation, then you need one, recognizing that this is an exponentially developing field, creating massive and increasing competitive advantages for those corporations. And then the third one of the supportive trends that we always talked about is AI and machine learning, because it is like a super powerful tool to extract more value and information from data, from proprietary data, that then furthers the benefit that can be bestowed upon clients and customers. And again, we see this trend, for a long period, and we have invested in it and grown with it. And I think, again, more and more people recognize that indeed this is a very, very powerful and probably very enduring trend, further shifting the power away from those that say have access to supercomputers to those that have access to super data that is proprietary and very, very hard to get. So you got two generational trends: climate change and weather impact and global security, supported by three further trends: digitalization of the global economy, the rise of AI and machine learning, and the increasing rise of space as an important realm for competitive advantage. that are continually driving demand for the types of products and services from Spire, giving us a great optimism for sustained decade-long high growth of the company.
So going back to again your recent quarterly conference call and what you just mentioned about AI, in the call you mentioned Spire's AI models. How quickly are they producing, and how quickly they're producing results? Can you discuss some of the changes AI has provided for Spire so far and what can come of it in the future?
So we have been using AI for like quite some time internally, but I think the one that has been publicly announced, and so it's most easiest for me to talk about, is in the realm of weather prediction, where Spire created a very, very powerful partnership with NVIDIA, which is a company producing so-called GPUs. Now, GPUs are so powerful because they really support the running of AI and machine learning models. And weather models used to historically be only possible to run on massive supercomputer clusters. Spire was one of the only one, if not the only one company at a certain point in time running a government level full numerical weather prediction model using those supercomputer clusters. Now we are talking 10,000 cores, and hours of compute time processing the data and coming up with a forecast, maybe with like 3-4 variation to create a somewhat probabilistic forecast. All of that recently was replaced where we ran a forecast of a similar kind of accuracy, a global forecast, in a mere matter of minutes. Which means instead of doing maybe 2 or 3 variations and get like a couple of data points for a probability distribution of outcomes, we now can run hundreds, maybe even thousands of variations and creating a very, very detailed probability curve of what might happen with a certain probability, giving companies like power grid operators a far better decision tool to decide where to stage recovery units, where to be of increased awareness of potential wildfires, where particular demand spikes might be coming from, or what the probability of an event is, for example, something like freezing, which would have a massive detrimental impact on their operations. So that just gives you a small sense of like how Spire has already been using AI and machine learning. And we see a tremendous amount of growth in helping our customers with far better and far more valuable weather prediction and forecasts by running those AI and machine learning models that we have on an NVIDIA hardware, for example, and powered by the massive amount of weather data coming off Spire. Spire is the commercial company with this single largest amount of commercially produced weather data anywhere in the world. But it also has a flip side benefit for us that now that NVIDIA in this partnership is using our data to create better models and creating it possible for other companies to play, buying those GPUs from them, and then using, for example, a weather model for their own business case, which means that they are then looking for the daily, hourly, maybe sometimes minute by minute updated weather information to feed those models. Well, Spire is the place to satisfy that demand that is created through like lowering the barrier from a computational side, but actually increasing the interest in unique and proprietary data. Another example of moving the power through AI from those with access to supercomputers to those with access to super data.
There recently was a solar storm. Did that affect your operations at all? And how do you deal with such issues? And how should investors approach those potential hurdles?
So the solar storm itself actually did happen. Yes, there were so-called CMEs and coronal mass ejections, and they happen on a somewhat regular basis. They did not have a massively disrupting effect on us. But there is a solar cycle. where the sun in like a roughly 7-year cycle is more active and less active. And just as we know when something gets hot, it expands a little bit, and when it gets cold, it contracts a little bit. A more active sun expands the Earth's atmosphere. Now, when it expands the Earth's atmosphere, it creates additional friction and interruption with the assets, spacecraft, space stations that are operating inside those very, very thin but still non-zero layers of the Earth's atmosphere. It's a very dynamic process, very, very hard to predict. In like the short term, the longer cycles are easier to predict. They are part of the space environment. The international law that is describing space starts with anyone, something like paragraph 1 or preamble 1. Anyone operating in space recognizes and accepts that space is a very difficult and harsh environment. And so they are part of that environment. It's a little bit like when you operate on the 7 seas as a ship, that the oceans can be unforgiving and you might get into bad weather. And so you have to be prepared. And sometimes there are costs to operating a ship on the open oceans. But they are part of the play. I think the same thing is true for operating in space. Overall, I would say the benefits of having this massive access to the ultimate high ground space substantially outweigh the harsh environment when you are well prepared. There will be impact sometimes, and I think we certainly have experienced some of that. But they are not like devastating. They are not like limiting. They're not like changing any of the interests, any of the strength of the demands. They're suddenly not saying, for China, what, it's a little bit too noisy up there. Let's just not use space and hope that everything is fine for the future, security. That's not how it works. It's not that we suddenly say, what, weather prediction is nice, but why don't we go back to the 1950s where we didn't use space to predict the weather and just kind of like stick our finger in the air and see how the weather is. So like, those little toys where it's like a rock on a string and it predicts the weather and it says, like, if the string is wet, it is raining. If the stone is moving, then it's like, yes, it is a dangerous, a difficult environment, which is very attractive for me because Spire has accumulated over 600 years of experience operating in this environment. Cumulatively, if you look at all of our spacecraft and the number of years that we've been doing this, it's a massive barrier to entry. And we like barriers to entry.
We have a few more minutes here. Can you discuss some financial highlights investors should be on the lookout for? I think given the Q2 and year guidance, the company should be growing at a nice pace and demonstrating positive cash flow. Is that correct?
That is correct. Again, I'm European, and so we have the strange notion that, you build a company, you prove that there's a market for it, so you grow it very quickly, and then you go straight forward into making it profitable. We have announced this over 2 years ago now, and we have been managing that steady path and march to its free cash flow profitability through wars and inflation and recessions and everything else that has happened over the last 2.5 years, and stuck to the timeline of free cash flow profitability this summer. We produced our first adjusted EBITDA positive by the end of Q4, which was a little bit ahead of plan. And we continue to drive, not just EBITDA profitability for this year, but indeed turning free cash flow profitable by the summer. I think that's just very, very important metrics because they really differentiate us from a whole set of other companies, especially when you look at companies that are growing at very, very high rates. It tends to be difficult for them. Spire has a pathway to be, north of 70% gross margin. The total cost of maintaining our infrastructure in space, the satellites, the launches, the ground stations, the manufacturing facilities, is just limited to $5 to $7 million a year, allowing an almost unlimited amount of revenue production of our data, of our products that comes from it. And maybe the last item is like the strength of our balance sheet, which we further materially improved by adding another $40 million to our balance sheet in the first quarter, setting us up for a very, very strong position to take advantage of the free cash flow profitability where it comes, and then direct that into investing, for example, in sales and marketing to maybe even further drive that growth of the company.
Which, by the way, those capital raises were done at higher prices relative to where the stock is today. Just want to point that out too.
Correct. Substantially higher. Yes.
So a couple more questions here. Assuming this guidance that we just, that you just parlayed to the audience, can you share where the company is in the process with regards to refinancing your debt?
We have kicked off this process, as we indicated now for a little while, that we think that this year is a good year to refinance the outstanding debt that we have, given that it is priced and structured in a way more appropriate for a company of Spire 2.5 years ago, with much less revenue and much higher cash burn and all those kind of elements. And so we believe it's very, very appropriate for us to refinance it way ahead of its maturation in the summer of 2026. And we target to do this this year. And we feel good about the process, the interest, the preparation, the setup that we have for that process.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Anything else you'd like to add before we conclude the discussion?
I think what you should take away from the company story today is that it is a subscription-based business. Virtually all of our products are sold as a subscription with extremely high gross and net retention rates, over 100%. So customers keep on coming back for many, many, many years. And that's highly attractive, a high gross margin business with actually a low CapEx need, the 5 to 7 million that are needed, that I mentioned, but very, very high barriers to entry. That's a very, very unique combination to have, the features from a margin and growth perspective of a subscription business, and the barriers to entry from a deep tech company perspective, which is, I think, setting us up very well to be a highly attractive company for many, many years to come, for our customers, for our employees, and of course, for you, our potential investors.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter, today for your time, and we greatly appreciate it. To anyone out there who has not already signed up for a one-on-one, again, please send me an email at lowensteiner@lythampartners.com, or again, visit lythampartners.com/select2024 and click the investor registration button. We hope we all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much, Peter.
My pleasure, Adam. Thank you so much for having me.